So it's the beginning of the weekend and we could all chill and relax. But let's do today a Transformer Slag podcast Patreon listener question. If you want to be part of the Transformer Slag podcast Patreon, help support the podcast, let us know we're doing a half-decent job here in the Transformer world and the news and reviews and keeping you educated on everything that's going on in our hobby. Again, patreon.com/protoman, or check the pinned comment or description below if you want to throw us a couple of bucks. What does it get you by throwing us a couple of bucks? What does it get you? Well, depending on what tier, you get your name in the end credit scroll at the end of every segment moving forward. Access to the Transformer Slag podcast Discord, where we break the news, discuss the news, talk about the news, and more. Great place to also save money on your hobby because we post all the sales and everything that are going on around the world. So you could save money collecting the robots in disguise. And depending on what tier, on the higher tiers, you might get a little gift in the mail, a little something something sent to you, or even access to ask a question on the podcast through the Patreon listener question. We got a Patreon listener question here from Springus Prime, and Springus Prime wants to know, hey, Proto Man, I got a listener question for you. With Hasbro's reluctance in the past to use primes other than Optimus Prime, why was it that Galaxy Force used the Convoy name so much and so heavily? Keep up the amazing work, Springus Prime. Well, first, we're kind of comparing apples and oranges. Like, you're talking Hasbro and how they do their naming and the whole thing with trademarks, which we've talked about all the time on the podcast, and Galaxy Force, which is the Japanese Takara version of Cybertron, and how they kind of have a different way and approach, and especially when it comes to trademarks. You have to keep in mind that, like, let's say like we look at Galaxy Force instead, and we look at its American counterpart of Cybertron. All of those characters that had Convoy at the end didn't have Convoy. They didn't have Prime. They were just kind of their own trademarks that were really pre-existing trademarks in a way to maintain things. Case in point, you had Nitro Convoy in Galaxy Force. It was called Override. Again, a previously existing G1 trademark. You had Flame Convoy in Galaxy Force, and then you had Scourge. And they pretty much just called him Scourge because that sort of became a good name for an evil Optimus Prime character. And considering that Flame Convoy was kind of, at one point, an evil villain character in Galaxy Force, the Scourge name just kind of worked well. And again, a trademark that's kept in use throughout the years for both, whether it be a sweep or an evil Optimus character. And of course, Live Convoy, the helicopter in Galaxy Force, was called Evac. And of course, while Evac wasn't a big used name at that moment in 2005 and 2006, would go on to be used as the pretty much main featured mascot of the Universal Studios rides and stuff like that. And that trademark still finds its place here and there within the Hasbro bubble world. And then, of course, Megalo Convoy, our big giant planet convoy leader, was called, well, Metroplex. And we don't really need to explain Metroplex when it comes to a trademark. So, I mean, it's kind of apples and oranges. It really is. It's Takara. They wanted to use that Convoy thing. They didn't have to worry about trademarks and using pre-existing names, so they could make new names and new stuff without having to worry about that. And Takara also has been a lot more had a lot different way of tackling things when it comes to that, because initially it was like, you had Convoy, Optimus Prime, and then you had Rodimus Convoy, Rodimus Prime. But then afterwards, it was Fortress Maximus. It was, Jinrai, God Jinrai. It was Star Saber, Diatlas. So they really avoided, even in the later half of G1, the Convoy kind of connection. And if anything, the Convoy thing was related to the matrix of leadership than it was against, it being a leader of the Autobots. And that was the Japanese side of things. And then when you go on more, when you get back to the Beast Wars thing, yeah, okay, we had Convoy again for Optimus Primal because leader, it's got to be a Convoy. But then you had Lio Convoy, you had Big Convoy, you had the Convoy Council. There's that huge connection there to Vector Sigma and or Primus, and the reason why that Convoy thing kind of exists on the Japanese side of things. By the time we get to Galaxy Force, it's just more the same of that, except now it's just Convoy represents leaders. It was originally Convoy in Armada, aka Micron Legend, and then it was Grand Convoy in Energon, aka what was called Superlink over there, to kind of separate the convoys and have a different, toy. And then, of course, we had Galaxy Convoy, aka Galaxy Force Optimus Prime, or, you know, Optimus Prime and Cybertron. So it's kind of, that's just how they always handled things there. In terms of the Hasbro side of it and the reluctance to use Optimus Prime as a name, again, it's a little bit of trademarks, and it's just a little bit of what they were doing back then. The idea of a Prime being at the end of the name of a character really was related to the Matrix bearer. So it was Optimus Prime, it was Rodimus Prime, and then they really kind of didn't play with anything outside of that. And even the ones that, you know, held the Matrix before, it's like, okay, there was a Sentinel Prime before that was in the Marvel comics, and then you had Prima, so that's kind of not even a Prime. And then you had Prime Nova and all kinds of, like, you know, a lot of different, they were still trying to understand what they were doing with that, because Rodimus Prime really was the first one to go, hey, when you become a leader, you got Prime at the end. You know, where that idea really didn't exist before, when it was like, oh, Prowl's going to be the leader. Okay, he's just going to stay Prowl. Or Grimlock's going to be leader. He's going to have a crown. You know, like, it didn't really change anything. Rodimus getting the Prime at the end, if anything, was, again, more of a Primus matrix of leadership kind of thing. And when we get to something like Beast Wars, it's Optimus Primal. And there is no Primal added to the end of anyone else who becomes leader, whether it be Rat Trap temporarily or otherwise. It's just Rat Trap as leader now. And when you look at stuff like even the Unicron trilogy and the English side of things, it's Optimus Prime, Optimus Prime, Optimus Prime. And all of those other Convoy characters, like we said in Cybertron, they just had their trademark names. The Prime thing didn't really become a spread out kind of thing until we got to Aaron Archer playing with the idea of the original 13 and who their identities really were. We always knew the original 13 was a thing. It was something that was always discussed as early as the 2000s with Simon Furman, but it was never really fleshed out who those guys were. There was, you know, speculation. Oh, it's got maybe Alpha Trion's part of them, but he's not a Prime, so there's we're not going to have Optimus Prime or any of those others attached to the original 13, because Alpha Trion doesn't have Prime in his name. Then you have the Fallen. And if the Fallen is Megatronus, then, I mean, it's not Megatronus Prime, it's just Megatronus. So, you know, they're not Primes. But then that sort of evolved throughout the years. And then it's like, okay, yeah, actually they all are Primes in a sense. And they're the original 13 Primes. And, you know, Prima is just kind of Prime in itself. And it's, you know, Alchemist Prime and Liege Maximo Prime and all of this Prime. And again, what we had really the first one, which oddly enough in the Japanese version of Galaxy Force, Vector Prime. And he was called Vector Prime. And that was Aaron Archer early on playing with those ideas of, we're going to talk about the original 13. And even at one point when, I mean, we're going to kind of cover that in the future on the Toy Armada podcast at some point. But they were even playing with the idea of, well, you know, is it going to be the Fallen? Is it going to be this new guy, Vector Prime? Who are we going to go with? There was, you know, they were talking back and forth at the time with Dreamwave that was also doing stuff with the Fallen, where he made his official debut in the War Within comics. There was so much still kind of festering in the background that they didn't know how they were going to tackle it. In terms of today, when it comes to the reluctance of adding that to the end of stuff, outside of trademarks, again, you got to have a Rodimus Prime trademark out of there somewhere, but making new ones, that's where it becomes kind of dicey, because still to this day, the understanding of why you would attach that to the end of a character, there is no Bumble Miss Prime or something like that. It's really more tied to the Matrix, and it's tied to the original 13, and then the looseness of what was going on the Japanese side of Galaxy Force, where these leaders had Convoy at the end. And Japan still does that. Japan would probably, like, you know, I joked about it with BotBots, but it's like, yeah, we're probably going to have Burgertron be the leader of the BotBots in this show, but it wouldn't surprise me if Japan wanted to call him Burger Convoy, you know, like, because they like to have that more, that synergy and stuff, and kind of have that more emphasis on, well, leaders have to have this, because they don't have to worry about keeping a trademark 4 years later or something if it picks up. It's a little bit of a different animal. So that's probably the primary reason why there was those differences between those two brands on two different sides of the ocean, and why Hasbro, I don't want to say is reluctant to do it, but it's just more from a business standpoint and keeping trademarks. Again, like, they called Megalo Convoy Metroplex, you know, just because they're like, well, we got to get that Metroplex trademark out there and keep it safe. And it continues and it continues. They could have easily called, Flame Convoy Nemesis Prime, but they didn't really want to. They kind of already did Nemesis Prime and the Armada toy, and they're probably going to do a Nemesis Prime by the time we roll around to something like the Alternators toy line, and they were going to definitely throw it out there many times afterwards just to keep it afloat. So they didn't really have to, but they were probably going like, do we have anything with Scourge right now? Are we going to do something with that Scourge thing during the 2007 movie that we're working on? Are we going to do Scourge with that animated thing? No, we're not. Oh, okay. What about that? Maybe we'll put Scourge out now in 2005, and then in a couple of years we'll put him on a Titanium's toy. And again, that's, if you really track the history, that's kind of how that works. Unfortunately, we always fall on trademarks. It always seems to be, but that's really like how the ship is steered in a lot of ways. It's kind of a sad truth, but it does kind of stifle creativity a little bit, especially when it comes from a naming convention. The truth with the BotBots line is almost none of those names are trademarked. It's just them doing one and done fun little creative stuff. And that's why I love BotBots, because, you might not like I don't like the animation, or it's kind of a kiddie idea, but you can't deny the creativity, both on a conventional naming standpoint and the toys themselves. And as a lifelong Transformer fan since the beginning, you can't knock stuff like that. So I hope that answers that question a little bit. It's really just Japan was just kind of doing its own thing, and Hasbro was just kind of doing its own thing. And if we do see a new fresh Prime today, it's really just pulling from the original 13, or it's going back to the Rodimus Prime well. I don't think we will see, we get the odd Nova Prime maybe, that was from Fun Publications, but I don't really see anything that's a new Prime that we haven't heard of yet getting something new. I think we're going to have to, it'd have to be something they'd really dedicate themselves to in terms of, long-term character and storyline development. Like if they're going to be like, okay, we're going to have Megatronus Prime, this is going to be a trademark we're going to have, and we're going to run with this for the next 5 years, then I could see them doing it. But if it's going to be something that's going to be one standalone toy or something, they rather probably put that into an Alpha Trion or something else. I just see that. So I hope that answers that question. And it kind of opens up a bit of a discussion if there's something I might have left out, or something that people might think that would be a good application to it. You could post it in the comments below. But again, if you want to be a patron like Spring is Prime and ask a question, or you just want to be part of the Transformer Slag podcast Patreon and support us and let us know we're doing a good job, and come join us in the Discord and hang out. Again, patreon.com/Protoman. And again, tomorrow is Saturday, so we're going to have a live stream. Be sure to come by, check that out. We'll cover the limited amount of news we had this week and answer a whole bunch of super chat questions from the audience. And like I always say, rock out with the robots in disguise.